You need a real sense of where you stand relative to your key competition, and you need to know how much in general it's worth. The connection to value is the thing that I often find is most missing.
Hi,
Hi,
Jason.
Quinn. How are you?
I'm good. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
So we're going to talk a little bit today about CX measurement, what we see, what we don't see, what we wish we saw, and I would love to get your thoughts on it.
One of the things that a lot of our clients struggle with is they have so many different measures. They have so many different ways to measure, so many different times that they measure. And I think it produces a lot of confusion often with our clients. They don't know how to think about when they care about blinded things, when they care about unblinded things, when they only want to talk about how something went at a touch point, when they want to think about how something went overall as a brand. And I think it really causes a good deal of confusion for our clients. And it's one of the things that we're trying to help bring some clarity to. You know, when Fred Reichelt started all of this 25 years ago, at the beginning, the promise was, oh, just one simple question, you're good to go. And I think one of the realities is that there are lots of different ways that you want to be asking your customers how things are going.
Totally.
If you want a complete picture of what to do.
Totally. And I'm curious, what do you see as the most normal or the most typical way that people are and companies are measuring CX right now in terms of the structure they're setting up, who's looking at it? How do you see that?
Yeah, and again, there are a handful of places that I think are getting the full thing right, but I think in general there are 3 or 4 broad ways that companies are measuring how happy their customers are. A lot of them are doing sort of the live, unblinded customer survey type thing. So they ping their customers after they've had an interaction. They are getting measures off of all of those types of things. There are obviously lots of players in that space who help them collect that type of data. Obviously, we play in a slightly different place with Prism, which is more this blinded view of how you stand relative to competition, but also being able to get it down to the level of the journeys and touch points and channels so that it can talk to this other data better. And then obviously a lot of companies are experimenting with more unstructured types of data, more using their operational data to tell them whether or not customers are happy or unhappy without having to ask them. And so you end up with there are these blinded streams which give the best competitive lens. There are these unblinded streams where you're asking the customers, but they know it's you asking. There's figuring out how to fine tune your operational data so that you can tell whether or not the customers are happy or not without having to talk to them. And then the fourth bucket is this unstructured data. Like, what are the customers just saying out in the world? And how do you get that type of data robust enough that you can actually use it? Because in theory, there's a lot of information that sits out there.
Totally. And I think what's so hard about that, like from what I see, is that all makes sense. But when you try to put all those together, that's often really, really hard to make sense of. How do you see that?
I always bring it back to, at any moment in time, there's something that you're doing as an organization that you should do differently, that you should fix, that you should adjust. Sort of the human problem that you run into in organizations is that as long as there's some green on the dashboard, most organizations are perfectly happy to keep doing what they were doing. And so the problem with there being so many metrics is that a lot of organizations, they put so much on the page. It's like a dashboard with 100 numbers on it. A dashboard with 100 numbers on it is too many. That there's no way you get any actual change in behavior off a dashboard like that, because there's always enough green somewhere that each of the various leaders in an organization convinced themselves that what they were already doing was correct.
So what do you think is the better way of doing it? So to put you on the spot a little bit, like what's the right number and kind of what are your kind of metrics that you would put in that number?
Yeah, I mean, you have to keep it to the right, handful of metrics that any particular leader in an organization should be looking at. We talk about this a lot down at the journey or episode level, where what I think a leader for that piece of a business needs to be looking at, there needs to be some clarity on competitively, are you good or not good at that piece of the experience? And so oftentimes that number comes from us. But then you need to be able to translate it into, here are the 3 or 4 operational reads that tell you whether or not the customers are happy or not. And some of those are hard measures, like how hard are customers working? How long are things taking? Are they successful at the right percentage? There are a handful of those measures that give you a sense of, from just a hard metrics perspective, should the customers be happier than they were a week ago, a month ago. But then there are also some soft measures. There are often a handful of those soft measures that actually matter a lot more than the organizations feel like they do, and those are hard to get at. So those come up as, was the person on the phone empathetic enough? Did the customer feel like things were clear and understandable and, timely? And those types of things that are in the customer's head, you have to figure out how to get those right handful of measures. And so it's hard because it's not like there's one metric, but I think for any one piece of the business, you can get it down to the right 5 or 6 that they really should be tracking. And I think once you can get it down to that level, now if it really is all green, there probably are good to go, but it's going to point out where the major gaps are in a way that is not typical in most organizations today.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And you're right. You're right. I hear a lot of that too, where sometimes things are hard to measure, or when you measure them, they can be squishy, for lack of a more technical term. And I often see debates about, well, we don't really know what the customer means by empathetic, or, it's hard to how can you measure this? My perspective has always been, I would rather have a measurement that's like 80% correct, 90% correct than nothing. But I think there's a lot of debate about that. Like, how do you see that play out?
Yeah, so I just had a conversation with a grocery company, a fairly major grocery company in the US, where if you look at they were trying to figure out whether or not they were ahead or behind in checkout. In our data, like, time matters, like how long are customers waiting at checkout clearly matters, but it's not the only thing that matters.
Sure.
Some of the soft stuff matters, like, was the checkout person friendly, matters. Whether or not the customer blamed the store for the wait matters, which is sort of, there's this difference across the grocers in terms of, do they think it's because the store wasn't trying to make the line move fast, or were you just there when it was super busy? And if you're there when you're super busy,
what everybody does.
If you go Saturday at 10 a.m., you don't blame the store, you blame yourself. And so the interesting thing for this grocer is they really are faster. Like, they're trailing Costco in checkout, which is a thing that they care about. And they are faster at checkout than Costco. That is true. And so when they look at the data, they view their scores being lower than Costco as like some failure in the measurement system. They're like, well, this means that the customers don't really know. But the problem is that the soft measures, they're way behind on. They're behind on friendly. They're behind on blame rate. Costco gets blamed for the line less. Like, there are real reasons, not just, the customers were confused reasons. There are real reasons why sort of faster but less friendly is actually worse. And like, our data helps to call that out. And so the grocers who are only measuring the stuff that you can measure with a stopwatch are going to miss things. And they're going to overinvest in the wrong things. They're going to keep trying to make their checkout faster and faster and faster. But the answer was actually, the value was somewhere else. The value was in the soft stuff. And so you have to get the hard stuff and the soft stuff measured in some way or another, because if you don't, you end up investing in the wrong places, which is always the most frustrating thing that I hear from clients. They feel like they're trying, and then they almost end up disappointed in their customers. Like, their customers just don't appreciate what we're doing for them. But it was that the customers were caring about something else.
Right.
And it's lost.
Like, you get what you measure. So you're trying to do a whole bunch of things and you don't understand why you're not getting that love in return.
Right. Yeah. Why aren't you getting the love? Like, like, this came up with a cable client recently where they were measuring outages too narrowly. Like their customers' definition of what an outage was different than theirs. And so in their, their internal measure of, well, how many customers are having stuff break was too small because they were just defining it differently. So if you're the break fix team at a cable company, one of the things that obviously matters is, well, how often is the cable going out?
Yeah, exactly.
But if you're defining cable going out differently than how your customers do, your operational measures are going to suggest that your customers are supposed to be happier than they are. And then you just get disappointed in the customers. You're like, well, they're just not appreciating what we're doing.
Yeah.
But that's actually not the problem.
And there's actually, like, from everything you just said, there's a lot to get right to do this well. You have to have focus on the right small number of things you're measuring, even though there's thousands and thousands of metrics. You got to pick the right 10 to 15 probably to be ruthlessly focused on. And then you have to have the right source of the data to track the right thing. And then you have to have the right questions to ask to measure things that are hard to measure. So all of that's really hard to put together. What are a few places, a few companies that you are seeing that do this well? Because that's hard to put all of that together.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to put it all together. And it's interesting because, and this is one of the things that I think is hard for what we do and for the clients that we talk to. I think some of the clients, it's less that they're measuring the right things and they just sort of have a better sense intuitively of what they're supposed to be doing. And so it's less that they needed the measures to get the right behaviors. They just sort of knew what the right behaviors were without necessarily needing the system. But we do see a lot of companies that are making these improvements, like this cable company I was talking to. They've now redefined how they measure outages. And that is going to lead to real improvements for how their customers feel about them. And so we've seen this. I've seen this in, large financial services institutions, large telco institutions, where you really can take a customer base that is fairly unhappy and make them a lot less unhappy and maybe even make them super happy. And so we do see the changes occur, but it really does require that focus, as you're describing, of knowing what really matters and really starting to measure what does matter and really drive the improvements in a way that they weren't before.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think I'm curious, right, as we talk about like the right 10 to 15 metrics, I have one in my head, but what do you think the metric that's most valuable and is missing? Like the unsung hero of the NPS metrics.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to pick just one, but what organizations need to know is where they really stand relative to their key competitors. So oftentimes that's missing. And that can be missing both because you're not measuring it or because you're measuring your competitor set too narrowly.
In a different way.
Yeah, companies like to compare themselves to very similar organizations, even if customers are switching to a new model. And so if you're a bank, but you're ignoring the new digital banks, you can't ignore the fintechs. If you're a mobile phone company, should you pay attention to what Mint is doing? Like, these are complicated questions of when does the new model matter. But you need a real sense of where you stand relative to your key competition, and you need to know how much in general it's worth to fix it. The connection to value is the thing that I often find is most missing. The most frustrating path I see with clients is they get this fact base around what they think all the drivers are, and then they stand up all these teams to start doing all this activity around fixing things. And then those teams start to come with laundry lists of things that they want to do, each of which have a price tag on them. And that's when they stall, because the team is coming with, a whole bunch of 5, 10, 15, $50 million things that they might want to go do.
Yeah.
And that just stalls in the budget process. And so if you don't have clear value linkages, it's very hard to get the actual investments through the budgeting process.
I think that makes total sense. And I see that a lot as well. The other thing I always see, even though it's really nuanced, is a lot of it's really easy to focus on your own score. So even if you're looking at kind of something like Prism or you're looking at a competitive score, it's really easy to look at your own score and being like, is my score going up? And I often see what I always see, like the unsung hero is your gap to the leader. Or if you're the leader, how far above number two are you? Because I think it's so easy and so frustrating when you're doing all this work and you see your customer scores going up, you're serving your customers better. And the answer is you're still number three or you're still kind of number four. And that's super frustrating. But the focus should all be, and so you can kind of miss the forest for the trees versus the focus is, but everybody is trying to do the same thing you're trying to do. Everybody is kind of in a race to serve their customers. And so the bar changes. And I think that that's really, really tough. I mean, it's just a hard thing to do. So I think for me, it's like the gap, measuring the gap to the leaders instead of focusing on your numbers is it feels obvious, but I don't feel like it's all that practiced as we would think.
Yeah, no, it's really hard. I mean, we have clients where they've been making progress with their own customers, but as you said, they're not really closing gaps to the people that they're losing share to. And they're so frustrated because they feel like they're spinning their wheels, that they're putting in all this effort. They're getting some good positive signal from their customers. But as you said, if you take a step back, this is really good for customers. I want the bar to keep going up. I want, the view on what's easy to continually change. And the definition of how fast is fast enough should be changing all the time. And, organizations shouldn't be able to just sit still, keep delivering exactly the same experience over and over again and hoping to continue to keep their customers happy.
That makes sense. Jason, this has been a really, really good discussion. I'm sure more to come in the future
Absolutely.
on the same topic.
Yeah, absolutely. This is what we talk about every day with our clients. So it's always fun to catch up, Quinn.
Good to see you. Talk soon.
Good to see you too. Talk soon.